It is said that in the time before time, in the age before memory, before Azeroth had the brightness of day and the darkness of night to mark her steps, the Earth Mother spent her waking hours roaming the vast emptiness of the world. Alone, she braved the shadows and the whispers that rose from the depths. She heard the Old Ones speak their deceptions, but she could not be swayed. Still, she had cause to worry, for she was with child, and knew she could not labor with nothing to safeguard her newborn children from the creeping deep. She journeyed on, searching for a place where she could safely give birth to the light of her heart, away from the corruption. Finding no such sanctuary, she decided that she would craft a haven herself. And so, she set about the task of shaping the worlds. She cupped her hands to form the land. She bent her back to raise the mountains, and pricked her fingers upon their peaks. Where her nails grazed the stone, sparks rose, hot and wild. Her fingers cut groves into the earth, and from them flowed the first waters. Soon, great seas and oceans stretched before her, rushing to chase the newly formed rocks and fires at the shore. Water, earth, and flame beat against one another, none of them yielding. The Earth Mother laughed at the antics of her creation, and from her breath were loosed the winds. They cut across the land, whipping up the newly laid dust. Gently, the Earth Mother bid them, but the winds were over-eager and restless, and so she knelt to show them how to lighten their touch. Like this, she sighed upon the shining fog that now rested along the ground and sent it spiraling into the heavens. The mist rose until they could get no higher, curling white and wispy at first, and soon thick and grey. When the clouds could hold no more, the skies opened up and the first rains fell heavy. The earth eagerly drank this bounty, and in return offered up the grass, the brush, the trees and forests, the swamps and jungles. The winds, having learned their lesson well, played softly through the vines and branches, over the flouting glades, dancing in the light. The Earth Mother gazed over these new works in wonder, and called the elements by name. She gave names to the newborn rivers. She played games with the winds as they raced across the open plains. She lay against the still young mountains to speak at length with the stone. And oh, how she loved to stretch her arms towards the heavens and feel the stars kiss her fingertips. All the wilds were her creation, her place of peace, her sanctuary. You will make fine companions for my children, she said to the elements. The Earth Mother grew to love the elements, and they loved her. So much so that when she asked for warmth, the mountains poured out their molten hearts for her. When she was parched, the skies opened up and water dappled the ground. When she wished to hear music, the rivers whispered and the flames roared. Everything was new and radiant, brimming with her essence, enough to keep the darkness of the deep at bay. Now, she decided, I can bring forth my children. And so, the Earth Mother knelt upon the golden plains. The ground cradled her body. The rivers cooled her brow. The mountains provided shelter, and fire beat back the dark. There she labored, provided for, cared for, until finally, from her womb came the first light of day, radiant and glorious. Then came the second, gentle and luminous. Anshi, she whispered to the first child, my son, may you bring life, burning and bright. And Musha, she said to the second, my daughter, may you bring rest, tranquil and healing. Swift and eager, the winds carried news of the newborn children across the land and sea, and the elements rejoiced as they gathered near to bask in the light of the twins. Anshi and Musha, they had been named. Sun and Moon, the elements called them. Over time, the twins grew close with their mother's many creations. Anshi could wield fire's light and warmth of his own, and Musha danced with the waters of the tides. Anshi made steadfast friends with the mountains, and Musha shared secrets with the winds. The twins grew steadily in their power, soon able to influence the elements themselves. So strong was their bond that the twins were able to use the might of the elements to forge weapons so that they may spar and play. dual blades for Anshi, and a bow with arrows for Musha. This brought the Earth Mother joy immeasurable. With soft words and tender touches, she walked her children through the ages, hand in hand, showing them the secrets of this infinite land, marveling at their play with each other and with the elements themselves. This, she saw, was good. And yet, the Earth Mother was ever watchful, ever vigilant. Her dear children were still young, still vulnerable to the corruption that lurked in the depths. The elements kept the shadows at bay as best they could, but still, the Earth Mother worried. She stood guard over the twins always, never sleeping, never looking away, always keeping them close, even with their elemental guardians so near. Eventually, the work of creation and of giving birth, and then of her ceaseless watch began to tire the Earth Mother. She grew weary and knew that she would soon need to rest, but fear ate at her still. How could she sleep and protect her children? How could she keep them close, keep them safe from the darkness? Remembering how the mountain had sheltered her while she labored, the Earth Mother took up her twins, the sun and the moon, and pressed them in her eyes. As she did this, first with Anshi, the light of day faded, and the world finally knew night. The peace and calm that fell over the land, it soothed the Earth Mother's spirit. Sun and moon, night and day, now will I always see thee, my children. Finally, she took in Musha, the light of her love, finally returning to her fully. This would keep her children safe and hidden. Watch over this world, the Earth Mother said to the elements as she prepared to slumber. Guard it against the shadows until I wake again. And so, the Earth Mother slept while she nurtured sun and moon, as she had when she carried them, resting first with one eye shut and then the other. She kept one always open, for so great was her children's power, their light, that it could no longer be fully contained. This restless watch, where she was never fully asleep, denied the world the warmth that Anshi had learned to wield. This cold crept across the land. It kept the mountains in ice and froze the rivers. When the rains came, they fell in the first snows of winter. Musha's powers were similarly diminished by her mother's rest. Without the moon to guide the winds through their dance, they whipped up in storms and blizzards. When the Earth Mother had rested enough, she opened her eyes onto this altered world. She saw how the elements had changed in the absence of her children, and she very nearly wept at the sight. But then, as the light of sun and moon returned with her gaze, the cold storms abated, and all returned to what it once was. The elements consoled her, speaking of the new life that had arisen as a result of her time of rest. They showed her the thriving plants and animals amongst the melting snow to convince her that this too was good. And so, the Earth Mother named the seasons in her time of work and her time of rest. From her eyes, she showed her children how to guide the elements through these new seasons, how to color the leaves before letting them fall, how to bolster the fields before letting seed take roots. And soon, as they had with the elements' raw power, Anshi and Musha could bring on the changes at will. Good, the Earth Mother said to her growing children. You have shown me your strength. You have proven your power. You can withstand the dark. This world is yours. I made it for you. Watch over it and care for all that call it home. But you must still stay safe inside my eyes. And so it was that when the Earth Mother would take her rest, from behind her shut eyes, Anshi and Musha's ever-growing power, it would tend the changes of the world, calling the seasons to their rightful time. The twins nestled in their mother's head together, always near each other, their light shining across the lands from beneath her eyelashes. And when their mother would wake, their radiance would greet her, and the precious world bellow with joy. To see and feel her children grow and prosper greatly pleased the Earth Mother and filled her with such love. It brought her joy immeasurable, and she wished to share this happiness with her children. So, when it came time for her to slumber next, she stretched over the land, the golden plains cradling her as she slept. This way, the beating of her heart dug deep into the earth, and the song of life it carried saturated the soil. When next the Earth Mother awoke, she found new life huddled in the shadow of her bosom, Come, she called to these first children of the plains. See all that awaits you. Sensing this new life, Anshi and Musha shimmered and marveled. There are so many, Musha whispered. What will we call them? Anshi asked. The Earth Mother plucked wheat from the golden plains and sprinkled it over her new progeny. Shuhalo, she murmured. You are my love-made flesh, and I brought you forth so my children would know you. Anshi, Musha, my sun and moon, teach them what I have taught you, so that they may care for the land and commune with the elements, that they may see my love in you and in all things. And so it was that the sun and moon taught the Shuhalo, who came to be known as the Tarn, all that they knew, how to call on the elements, to take gifts from the bounty of the land to make homes and food, to sing and dance and roam the fields, to ferry the rivers and hunt the beasts of the bush. The Shuhalo gave thanks to the elements, to Anshi and Musha, and especially to the Earth Mother, mother of all creation, and for a time, it was good. But as the elements turned their attention more towards aiding the Tauren, the Old Ones trapped beneath the depths watched and waited with a patience as ancient as the world itself. And while Sun and Moon were strong enough to defend themselves, the Shuhalo were young and vulnerable. So it was that when next the Earth Mother slept, and Sun and Moon's power radiated from her slumbering eyes to bring about the change of the seasons, the Old Ones stretched their influence across the land. Slowly at first, the shadows crept through the cracks and crevices of the world. Then, growing bold, swept across the plains until their poisonous whispers pricked the hearts of the Tauren. The Old Ones had their own lessons to teach. Both quiet and innumerable were their voices of hatred, of anger, of greed, of sorrow, and of war. A number of the Shuhalo were deceived by these whispers. These corrupted Shuhalo embraced the words of wickedness and turned on their brethren. They rained down destruction on the land and family they were meant to share. Then there were the ones who lost their light. The darkness invaded their minds and took them from their very selves, until all that remained were broken thoughts and battered beings. Anshi and Musha watched helplessly as the Shuhalo were consumed by chaos. They did not know what to do, for their mother had only ever spoken of shadows, not the terrible suffering these powers would bring. Distraught, Sun and Moon cried out in anguish, waking the Earth Mother so she could see what had been wrought. Instead of water, blood soaked the earth. Fires had turned the forest to ash. The winds howled with vicious storms, and the ground itself shook with a fury that cracked open stone and left the land scarred. All was in disarray, for the Shuhalo had turned the elements loose against one another, and for the first time, Tauren slew Tauren. What is this? The Earth Mother gasped in horror. What has happened? Something dark, Anshi wailed. From the deep, Musha lamented. The Earth Mother, saddened by what had come to pass, wept a single tear. The world she had taken such care into carving, molded a land to rise as hills and fall as valleys, teaching the elements to tend the forests, leading the Shuhalo to seed the plains, was now tainted. The darkness had come, and she was unable to prevent the hold it had taken. The shadow was rooted in the earth, and anything that touched it could eventually fall. This meant, the Earth Mother realized, that she herself was no longer a safe haven for her children. She was forever connected to these lands, and so she could never leave them. In time, perhaps she too would succumb and be the reason Anshi and Musha might as well. Devastated and unwilling to take such a risk, she wiped away the lone tear she had before wrenching her eyes free, her fingers digging so deeply that the light of the sun and moon would never be able to return to her again. Forgive me, my children, she cried. It is the only way. Flung free from her skull, Anshi and Musha tried to console their mother, but it was no use. She lay against the land, frozen in sorrow, now unable to see her children or her world. She did not move. She barely breathed. We must stop what did this, Anshi said to his sister. We must make it right. Musha agreed, and together they set off across the land, determined to hunt down what had corrupted the hearts of the Tauren and caused their mothers despair. As they traveled, word of the Earth Mother's sorrow and the twins' journey to save her from it was carried on the winds, and soon they were met by a party of Tauren. Be mindful, Musha cautioned her brother as the Shohalo advanced. We do not know if they have fallen prey to the madness. But as the Tauren drew near, it was clear that, though they had been touched by the darkness, they had not been taken it. We can trust them, Musha sighed in relief as she lowered her bow. A Tauren woman at the head of the caravan called out to the twins in greeting. Radiant Anshi, luminous Musha, we have heard the despair of the Earth Mother, and it has made our hearts heavy. We come to offer what aid we can. Anshi looked to his sister in surprise. After what has happened, our mother would not want them to risk so much, and it is our duty to protect them. The Tauren who had spoken for her people called out once more. Please hear us. Like you, we are her children. We live on our lands. We hear her whispers on the winds. We call her elements. We feel her light, her love in you, and we defend our family. The Tauren turned as a wagon was drawn forth. Musha and Anshi leaned in to see what the Tauren had brought before them, then leaned back in shock. Laid against a bed of long grass rested a baby. The child glowed blue with life and light, kin to the spark that burned in both sun and moon. We found the baby alone in the fields, the Tauren explained. We approached a watering hole to rest, but before we could drink, the water receded to cradle this little one here. At that, the baby opened her eyes and began to wail. The sound bore into the twins and pricked them in the same way as their mother's sorrow. That is when they recognized the child for who they were. The single tear their mother cried had fallen to the earth, and from it had sprung another life. Musha took up the child in her arms, and the babe quieted. They are our mother's light, she said to her brother. They are our family. What shall we call them? He asked, poking at the newborn curiously. Mother will know, Musha explained. Let us take them back to her. And what of the shadows? As the last word was uttered, a stillness fell over the plain, a silence most unnatural. Anshi ready his blades, Musha drew her bow. Together they waited and listened, guarding the Tauren and the babe. And then the shadow struck. The darkness was like a beast, reaching with its slithering grasp, seeking to tear and sunder. Anshi stood strong as the mountains and fought with the ferocity of fire. Musha evaded quick as the wind, flowing in and out of the shadow's reach like water. The Tauren called forth the elements to aid in the battle. Where the light of sun's blade burned, the shadows retreated. Where moon's glimmering arrows struck, the whispers evaporated. Together, sun and moon began to beat back the darkness that threatened to choke the land. The summoned elements chasing it back towards the recesses of the world. We're winning, Anshi cried, raising his sword to the sky. He did not see the reaching shadow until it was too late. It lashed out, aiming for his heart. Brother! Musha loosened an arrow. It found its mark, cleaving the darkness in twain, but not before Anshi was struck. He fell, grasping at his side, his blood welling between his fingers. Musha threw herself down beside him and sought to bind his wound with water and wind, but no matter what she did, he continued to bleed. The wound is too great, she said. I cannot heal it, but maybe our mother can. Do not leave me, sister, Anshi begged. I will not. She stayed at his side and instead sent her plea to the wind. When the Earth Mother heard of her children's peril, she shook herself loose of her grief. Great was her sorrow, but her love for Anshi and Musha was deeper still. She could not see the way, but the waters called her name and she followed. The winds pulled at her hands, guided her swiftly to find her sun and moon. Anshi, she called. Musha! Mother! Moon reached for the Earth Mother's hands, pulling her to her side. Anshi's hurt! When the Earth Mother knelt beside the twins, her fingers found her son's face and were wetted by his blood. I cannot close the wounds, Musha cried. But you are keeping him alive. The Earth Mother hugged her children, relieved to have found them, surprised to find they were not alone. Musha presented the babe to her mother. The Shuhalo found him lying on the plain, crying out as you did, birthed from your tear. The Earth Mother held the little one in her arms and was pricked by the light of joy once more. Losho, do not despair. As she rocked the baby, she asked her children what had become of the darkness. We drove it back for now, Anshi answered. But the Shuhalo are still not safe, Musha said. It will return any moment. What are we to do? Anshi is wounded, and I cannot fight. For if she and her healing light strayed too far from her brother, he would surely die. The Earth Mother turned toward her sun and moon. Though she could no longer see, she remembered clearly the vastness of her creation, the wonder and life, and the destruction in the wake of the shadows that had come to devour it. You are right, the Earth Mother finally said, the voice heavy with sadness, for she knew what must be done. The Shuhalo, my Shuhalo, are free but tainted. They will draw the shadows to them, unless I do something to contain them. Mother, no, the twins protested, but she quieted their storm, as she had with the elements so long ago. I must, and you must take to the heavens, forever this time. From there you will see all. From there your light will chase away whatever traces of shadow I cannot hold. Anshi, do not stray from your sister. Stay in her side always, so she may tend to your wounds. Musha, follow him closely. You will be a secret strength. Here. The Earth Mother touched her nose to the child in her arms, then pressed Losho into Musha's hold. Take them with you. They are young yet, and untouched by the darkness. Teach them, my children. Teach them my ways. Teach them to care for and protect the Shohalo and this world, as I have taught you. And let them know that they have my love. You all do. The Earth Mother hugged her children close to her one last time. She kissed their faces as she had when they were younger. Take care of each other and have courage, she said when they began to weep. For I am with you, as I am with all my children, always. And so Sun and Moon returned to the heavens, taking with them the new babe. Her heart heavy, but her conviction firm. The Earth Mother called the elements to her for the final time. She summoned the rage of the fires, the rush of the winds, the strength of the stones, the push of the waters. They came to her, and with their aid she stretched herself across the world. She bowed to embrace the lands one last time. She threw her arms wide to lay paths for the Shohalo to follow. She bent her ear to hear the winds as they carried the prayers of her children, and with her chest pressed to the earth, she let the beating of her heart dig deep once more. Here she rooted herself. Here she would make her stand. Here she would hold the shadows fast. Here she gave all of herself for her creations, never to rise and walk the land again, all to make the world safe for them. Seeing their mother's sacrifice, heartbroken Musha bade the breezes lift their mother's words so the Shuhalo could hear. She pulled at the tides and the whispering winds so they would always be able to find her voice and follow it. Anshi, with his fierce light, shone across the lands so the way would be clear. Together, they took their eternal post as young Losho watches and listens to the lessons of their siblings, hearing in them the wisdom of their mother. Where there is darkness, you are my light. When the shadows rise, you stem the tide. Be neither troubled nor tired, nor ever afraid, for in each other you shall always find me. You are stronger together, but you are never alone. Beneath the now ever-present glow of her sun and moons, the Earth Mother's essence cradles the world close, listening to all that happens. With her body, she beat back the darkness. By her love, the world was made safe. While the light may be gone from her eyes, the warmth of her heart is undying. And though the Shuhalo are no longer what they once were, she will never forsake them, for they are her children, and her love and wisdom will always be there to guide them.